Hey there, cheers. My name's Dylan Stafford. I'm a husband, a father, a writer. This is my story. I'm recording this April of 2021 in honor of my older boy just turning 14 for his birthday last week, but really for both my boys. I'm the father of two sons. This is a reflection of a family road trip that we took here at the end of COVID. It's called 3,612 COVID Memories. Hope you enjoy it. By Dylan Stafford, read by me, Dylan Stafford. 3,612 COVID Memories, a family road trip. 3,612 miles. For spring break 2021, towards the end, is it the end, of COVID, my wife Marissa and I rented a minivan, and with our two sons and two puppies, we drove to Texas. After a year of Los Angeles pandemic living, we were ready for some wide open spaces. We needed some home cooking with Grandma and Grandpa. You can do that in America. You can get in a car and drive thousands of miles. You can see sunsets and sunrises. You can cross rivers. You can drive across high deserts and see snow-capped mountains on the far horizon. How many people worked how many years in the heat and cold to build those roads we were driving? I am grateful for those people that I've never met. Thank you. You see families on vacation, stair-stepped kids living in brand new bodies, clambering out at rest stops, awkward and excited, gangly and growing. Last year my body was smaller. Look at me. How big will I get? Families, always stretching. I am not throwing away my shot. After my parents were vaccinated, Marissa realized we could use Zoom school for the boys, and we could spend spring break and Easter in Texas. This was a special chance. I was not throwing away my shot. Thank you to the scientists around the world working together who developed these vaccines. Jackson is now taller than I am. During COVID, our son Jackson became a teenager. His voice changed as he sprouted to 6 feet, even taller if you add his mop top of red hair. He starts high school this fall, and he wonders about sports and what classes he will take. A year ago he was shorter. Next year he'll be taller still, stretching. Christian's magic carpet ride. For most of the drive, our 9-year-old son Christian lounged on the far back row of the minivan, wrapped in a cocoon of luxury with pillows and snacks. He's growing too, and the road trip let me see where he is right now, his height, his manners, his personality. This trip is the only time our two boys will be exactly this way. Next year, they'll be different. Being a parent on vacation is a chance to seeing my family and other people's families. I'm awed by the fleeting moments I witness. My kids mark time better than any calendar. Don't blink. Don't blink, Dylan, or you'll miss the wonder. Eating across America. For the boys, this road trip was one long menu. Jackson fed his growing 6-foot metabolism. Christian squirreled away snacks in his kid cave back seat. I found crumbs and wrappers everywhere when I returned the minivan. Flavors of vacation. McDonald's, Dairy Queen, Sonic, Whataburger, Brahms, Papacitos, both the big national and the medium regional chains. Then, the unique places. Slavaceks, Pizza Lisa, Boomerang's BBQ. We travel across America for flavors that only exist on vacation. Memories made by smells and tastes and being with family. Soundtrack. AM radio, country songs long forgotten, or ranchero music with accordion flair and gritos. CDs, the music of my generation. Willie Nelson, the Dixie Chicks, the Eagles. On the road again, looking for wide open Winslow, Arizona, our kicks on 66. Lyrics about the land we were driving across. In English and in Spanish, we listened to songs inspired by the American West. Puppies! And we had our puppies, Lord Shax and Lady Buttercup, named by the boys. Their crate sat in the middle of the minivan, but the boys took them out a lot. Not quite a year old, our brother-sister COVID puppies made their first trip to Grandma and Grandpa's home. Taste the freedom. Crossing into Texas is like entering another country. The speed limit opens up to 80 miles an hour, and I set the cruise control to flow with the big rigs and trucks. I took a picture of the 80-mile-an-hour speed limit sign and texted it to my Texas A&M college buddies with the caption, "Back in Texas, taste the freedom." West Texas is booming. Everywhere you see the oil and gas production and the huge windmills. More people working outside in the heat and cold, hustling out here, making energy that we get to use. More people I've never met who make the world function. Thank you. News alert! COVID is over in West Texas. This just in. Driving across Interstate 10 during a pandemic, 604 miles from El Paso to Fort Worth, we gassed up twice and noticed that mask wearing is passé in West Texas. "Dad, how come no one is wearing masks?" Christian asked after the first pit stop. "Well, son, Texas has a better vaccine," I joked. "COVID is already over here." After 13 months in California's COVID worldview, I was jarred being back in Texas. And that's again the beauty of America. 50 different approaches, minimum. First hugs in over a year. Will we wear masks? About 30 minutes from arriving in Fort Worth, I called my parents. "Do you want us to wear masks?" I probably should have asked earlier, but here we were. They've been vaccinated almost 2 months. Marissa and I received our second shot 4 days before we left Los Angeles. Mom and Dad said they were comfortable without masks. We're going to see if the vaccine works. Thank you, scientists, for everything you did last year. Home again, jiggety-jig. 2 days, 1,423 miles away from Los Angeles, we pulled into my parents' driveway, my wife Marissa at the wheel. It was 8:20 p.m. on Friday night, 3 minutes faster than the GPS predicted. We unfolded ourselves, stretching and smiling, the puppies scampering and circling and sniffing, wagging wildly. The boys suddenly turned shy, but only for a moment. First hugs in 15 months. Grandma and Grandpa, my mom and Dad, greeted us. COVID worry faded into the first hugs since Christmas of 2019. This was the longest absence of my life, the longest my boys had gone without seeing their grandparents. Misty eyes, grateful smiles, hugs all around. The adults are vaccinated. We trust the kids are impervious without a vaccine. We muck forward through this pandemic protocol like all families. Thank you for health. At 78, my parents are healthy and vital. They're not as tall as they used to be, but they are blessed with energy. Their eyes were sparkly. Their joy melted off in waves. Who was happier, us or them? We will call it a tie. In Grandma's kitchen, Friday night, after 15 months apart, laughing, eating, being together. When I was a kid, we entered my grandma's home by the back door, coming right into her kitchen. Her small Dallas home smelled like plaster, and she would serve my brother and sister and me apple juice and goldfish crackers. Those smells and tastes still take me back. 50 years from now, what smells will take my boys back to this Friday night kitchen in Fort Worth with their grandma and grandpa? Worth every mile. Sandwiches, soup, ice cream. Lovingly, my mom had planned this welcome home nosh. The menu was worth every mile. There's only one Grandma's kitchen. Wide open spaces, friends, stars, coyotes. To the ranch for Grandpa and grandson. Saturday morning, Jackson and Grandpa had their own adventure, just the two of them, driving together to Grandpa's ranch, 2 hours south of Fort Worth. Out in the country, it's a rustic Texas garden we like to call Spunky Flats, after the soil and the terrain. It is my father's special place, 9 miles from the nearest town, off a farm to Market Road. Pickin and grinnin with my brother John. I stayed home, and Saturday afternoon I got to hang out with my brother John and his best friend Derek. John has converted his apartment into a music studio with cables and computers, guitars and gear everywhere. His space makes me want to create. I had a front row seat to a live performance of original songs by these two Texas songwriters. I imagined Willie or the Dixie Chicks back in the day before they were famous, right here in Texas. I was grateful for my brother's health and for the power of art to heal. Christian and I have our own road trip. Sunday morning, the next day, the rest of us followed Grandpa and Jackson down to the ranch. Christian and I left early in the minivan. Heading south, we were treated to a sunrise through buttermilk clouds with rays fanning out. I texted a photo to my Aggie friends with the caption, "God says good morning." I looked back to tell Christian to look out the window, but he had fallen asleep in his cocoon. Puppies and ranch dogs. Lord Shax and Lady Buttercup met the two Texas ranch dogs, Smokey and Pumpkin, walk-up strays my father has adopted. Sniffing and barking and more sniffing and more barking. Ooh, ooh, who are you? Yeah, what you gonna do? Palm Sunday croquet. Dear friends Pramod and Ishq and their son Eli drove up from Houston for a Sunday visit. We served salad and sandwiches. Jackson and Grandpa had mowed a big area for the first croquet match ever played on the ranch. Grandpa bought the croquet set for Christmas of 2019, our long ago last visit, and we had played our first match in the Fort Worth backyard then. We don't know the exact rules of croquet. Grandpa kind of makes them up as we go. For the adults, this leads to good-natured good banter, but for the kids, Counselor Christian. For the kids, croquet is tough. They fall farther behind, unable to advance their balls forward through the wickets as easily as the adults. Pramod and Ishq's son Eli is the same age as Christian. During the game, Eli got frustrated and threw himself on the ground. I know exactly what he is feeling. I have felt it 1,000 times. Let me talk to him. Those words came not from an adult, but from Christian, remembering his own Christmas croquet challenges 15 months earlier. He gave Eli a consoling pep talk, his arm draped around his shoulder. God's gift to the village. Some cultures see kids as the responsibility of the whole village, not just the parents' responsibility. Christian came to us through the miracle of adoption, and he blesses the entire village. I'm clear that his soul, up there in heaven, looking down and listening to our prayers, chose us as his family. Moments like this with Christian consoling Eli, where Christian's gentle spirit shines forth. Those are God flashes. Those flashes light the way for me to keep believing in the goodness of life. Aggies arrive. Dads go wild. Later in the week, Thursday, new friends arrived. Brady, Jeff, and Joel, 3 of my best friends from Texas A&M. All married to their original first wife. All fathers. 2 are veterans. All are stand-up men. At A&M, we spent 4 intense years together in the Corps of Cadets. When we were freshmen, they promised us, "You'll be best men at each other's wedding. You'll be pallbearers at each other's funeral." Jeff and Joel rode together down from Dallas. Brady drove up from Houston after work. Another reunion blessing of this road trip. Kolaches! Jeff and Joel brought kolaches, 3 heavy donut boxes filled with both sweet and savory breakfast treats. In college, Jeff's mom and dad, they were those parents, the best. They always brought cookies for Aggie weekends. They treated us to Tom's barbecue Sunday night after the hoopla of the football game had died down. Jeff continued in the tradition of his parents, bringing the good food. Fresh-baked kolaches are flavors I only taste in Central Texas. Over a century ago, German and Czech immigrants came to America, and some found their way to Central Texas. Their old world influence still lives if you look for it. We have Kolaches and Shiner Bock beer and the Schlitterbahn in New Braunfels. My dad finds tiny AM stations at the very end of the dial that still play polka music. Bonfire! When we were at Texas A&M in the late 1980s, the whole Corps of Cadets spent fall semester building the Texas Aggie Bonfire to light it the night before the rivalry game against the T-Sips over in Austin. Honoring that bonfire tradition, Dad set up a large brush pile, a safe distance, or so we hoped, from the farmhouse, next to a big cattle pond. As the sun faded in the west, we set it alight under a very still, very clear sky. Whoosh went the flames. No lighter fluid needed. The dry brush burning quickly lit the smaller branches and raced to old logs in the middle of the pile. Soon the flames were Texas tall, pagan, proud, and fierce. The smell of burning mesquite surrounded us as the crackles and pops filled the quiet evening air. I can't have bonfires in Los Angeles. Smell the freedom. S'mores and songs. After the flames calmed from a bonfire down to a campfire, we roasted marshmallows for s'mores. The Aggies enjoyed adult beverages. We had Jeff's portable speaker and he was the DJ all night, playing Jerry Jeff Walker and Garth Brooks and Kenny Rogers. More great country storytellers. Which is better, Mr. Bojangles, or The Gambler, or The Dance? For variety, Jeff mixed in random YouTube comedian clips. So Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock and Louis C.K. made a visit to the country with us too. Modern miracles. Couldn't do any of this when I was a kid. More thanks. The stars are big and bright. Orion looked down at us the first few hours before setting to the west. The Big Dipper was brightly dominant to the point of making the Little Dipper hard to make out. Deep in the heart of Texas, the stars are alive and well. Answer to a lifelong question. Cattle ponds in Central Texas are called tanks, and I have always wondered why. Christian attends bilingual elementary school here in Los Angeles, English and Spanish. And this year, helping him with his Zoom school homework, I learned that estanque is the Spanish word for pond. Tank is the English shortened translation of estanque and joins ranch and rodeo and bronco and mustang and all the other cowboy words that we actually inherited from Spanish. We spoke Spanish in Texas for 150 years before we spoke English. The Aggies found an echo. Feeding the fire and watching the stars march across the night sky, we Aggies discovered an echo. I'm not sure who heard it first, but from the edge of the tank on a very still night. If you yell loudly, you are rewarded with a 3-point echo in return. The land slowly slopes down to Big Creek, and there is enough of a valley that our voices traveled across and bounced back in 3 distinct pings. Hey! Comes back as hey, hey, hey. We woke up the critters. Starting about midnight, we yelled every word we thought might make a good echo and plenty that we knew would not. The good son part of me worried that we would wake my dad or Jackson, who were sleeping in the farmhouse. Turns out we did not wake the humans, but our echolocation yells roused the coyotes. From the dark distance, our racket triggered 2 different choruses of yelping coyotes roaming up and down Big Creek. And we woke up the cattle. We heard irritated lowing from Dad's herd and other herds beyond. And 1 big bullfrog. From the tank, 1 big bullfrog serenaded us throughout the evening. On his own schedule, he chose to harumph, harumph at us, independent of our yelling. I could spotlight him floating in the reeds about 6 feet from the shoreline. He was a big frog, probably close to a foot long, and he was content to sing the night away with us. One final visitor. About 2 a.m. we were rewarded with our final visitor. Glowing through the still bare trees, the moon rose and lit the night. It was only half full, but still bright enough that we could see our shadows dimly. Cowboy Hotel. Due to COVID and our farmhouse being small, we were going to sleep outside. In true Aggie fashion, we had not set up tents. "We'll do it later," had been the general consensus as the Aggies had arrived earlier that day. And now, after 3 a.m., it was time to deal with the consequences. It was too dark and we were too tired to pitch tents. Brady, who is one of 4 brothers, also a former fighter pilot, and definitely a Texan, well, in 3 minutes Brady transformed his truck bed into a cowboy hotel. "No problem. See you in the morning." Frost under the stars. Jeff, Joel, and I stumbled around and set up 3 cots with sleeping bags on the front porch. My dad added the porch a few years ago. It is 16 by 16 and big enough. Everyone wore as many layers as they had available. It was the end of winter, right before Easter, on a starlit night. The temperature had dropped. By the fire we had been fine, but after we doused the fire, the night was cold. There was frost on the sleeping bags in the morning, but that was part of the adventure. Fishing and drones on Good Friday. Have to make the coffee. 3 hours of cold sleep is plenty when you are with old friends. The east sky began to lighten, and the birds greeted our still sleeping bodies with their oh-so-cheerful morning calls. I crawled out of my cot and went inside the house to get the coffee brewing. People woke up casually, on vacation, and soon the warmed-up Kolaches came out, adding their savory and sweet deliciousness to the country morning. More modern miracles. Sunrise spirit. At 7 a.m., I stepped away to log on to a Zoom 12-step meeting. I've Zoomed into this particular meeting almost every day of COVID. It saved my sobriety and my sanity. Hosted in Fort Worth, this meeting has been my 5 a.m. California time wake-up call since March of 2020. I've only missed a few meetings all year. While my friends enjoyed Kolaches, I got my spirit right for the day. They're fishing that tank. Spring is coming to Texas and the day warmed up quickly. Brady asked if there were any fish in the tank. Brady grew up in Pearland, south of Houston, close to Galveston. He knows water better than any of us. He's a master fisherman. Borrowing rods from Grandpa's closet and tackle boxes that are older than I am, Brady spent the morning pulling out bass after bass. "Fish on!" Brady would yell as he caught another one. "Fish on!" we would echo back. There's a smile a fisherman makes when the fish are biting that you don't see on anybody else anywhere else. Brady wore that smile all day long. Jackson's grin. My son Jackson joined in the fishing. By the end of the day, Brady's tally was 21 fish, and Jackson had landed 11, by far the most Jackson had ever caught. I spent the day removing fish hooks and tossing Jackson's bass back into the tank. Jackson's grin was a close echo of Brady's smile. Men are made by men. Boys have to be taught how to be men by spending time with quality men. I remember this ranch with my grandfather and my dad and my uncle when I was a boy. Jackson will remember this too. Fish relocation project. Mid-morning, Grandpa got the idea that we could move some of the bass to other tanks on the ranch. This launched a fireman-style bass relay. Brady and Jackson caught the fish. Grandpa put them into 5-gallon buckets, half filled with water. My brother John and I hauled the buckets by motorcycle and four-wheeler across the ranch to other tanks. Necessary? Probably not. Entertaining? Incredibly so. Aggie engineering? 100%. Will this even work? Were we moving boy fish, girl fish, the right fish mix to repopulate the other tanks? I can't tell a male bass from a female bass, but it was so much fun that no one cared. And we were fast. We didn't lose a fish. We got them out of the tank, into the buckets, and across the ranch to the other tanks with speed and purpose. They all wiggled away into their new homes. Drone footage. And this being 2021, we made movies. Joel had brought his drone, a seriously capable aircraft with a high-definition camera. While Brady, Jackson, Grandpa, Dylan, and John worked the relay buckets and the bass, Jeff and Joel took turns flying the drone and making aerial movies of the ranch and our collective effort. A new pair of glasses. I've gone to this ranch my whole life, for over 50 years, but I have never seen it from the vantage that the drone offers. Central Texas is rugged and rough. Everything wants to scratch or poke or cut you. But watching the drone images from high in the air, the ranch is beautiful. In 12-step work, there is a common theme of seeing with new eyes, finding beauty in life that was always present, but that required a new pair of spiritual glasses, a new awakening to witness. Fishing with friends. At one point, Brady and I were each reeling in a bass at the same time. "Fish on!" Brady yelled. "Fish on!" Dylan yelled. Joel was flying the drone in front of us, hovering, filming. It is great to catch a fish at the same time with one of your best friends. And it is even better to have yet another best friend record the dual catch. I had my fisherman grin going too. These guys got me through college, through the Corps of Cadets, through Texas A&M. And here we were, 30 years later, Easter weekend, still being friends, with my dad and my brother and my son. Grandpa's smile, 30 years in the making. My dad's mom passed in 1991. My grandma, the same grandma who served apple juice and crackers to my brother and sister and me. That is when Dad inherited the ranch. It's been his special place ever since. He has meticulously cultivated it into a rough and rugged Texas oasis, hosting his legacy, his children and grandchildren, and our families and friends. My dad wore a gentle smile the whole visit. It wasn't the giddy grin of youth, but rather the calm smile of the elders, all those who look down from heaven, content that we live in the grace of the sacrifices they made, whether we realize it or not. Best of wives and best of women. This spring break trip only happened because my wife, Marissa, saw the possibility. When my parents learned they were getting vaccinated, she realized that with Zoom school for our boys, we could drive to Texas and spend Easter and spring break. I looked forward to this Texas visit for 2 months. It was the highlight of this crazy COVID year. I texted the Aggies to see who was up for a country reunion. Joel and Jeff and Brady rearranged their work schedules. And here we were, full-grown men with families and big responsibilities, sleeping under the stars, eating kolaches, catching bass, on a perfect winter-spring day. Being married is the best. Marissa, you are the best. You're a blessing. We are not throwing away our shot at making family memories. Thank you, my love. Family Cemetery. The Aggies couldn't stay forever. Jeff and Joel and Brady had their 3 families waiting to celebrate Easter. We had stuffed as many memories as we could into 48 hours. Thursday night, Good Friday, and Saturday morning. Then it was over and they were gone. Jeff and Joel back up to Dallas, Brady down to New Braunfels. Back to Fort Worth. We had our family waiting too. Marissa and Christian and my mom were up in Fort Worth, planning Easter dinner for Sunday and waiting for us to return. Marissa had worked remotely all week as she tried to land a new client, and she was ready to cook and celebrate Easter and be with family. She needed us to bring our appetites. But first, Sonic! I drove the minivan with Jackson while Grandpa stayed behind to close up the ranch and then follow. Sonic was next on Jackson's Eating Across America itinerary. We set the GPS on a Sonic in Waco, off Interstate 35, very close to Baylor University. After the swirl of the Aggies visit, I had a chance to be with Jackson and listen to his reflections from the week at the ranch. His deeper voice still catches me off guard. Who is this adult in the front seat with me? We could visit my sister Lisa. Sitting at Sonic, waiting for our lunch, I realized we were not very far from my sister Lisa. Oakwood Cemetery in Waco is the final resting place of my sister Lisa, in the family plot with our Stafford grandparents and great-grandparents. With our burgers in a bag, we drove to Oakwood. My cemetery memory was good enough to find the family plot. 2 large pecan trees stand watch over my family. The pecans were still bare from winter, but majestic even so. Texas is hard on trees. When you stand under a giant, you know it is a survivor. Hallowed be thy name. I bowed my head, placed my hand on Jackson's shoulder, and said the Lord's Prayer. We love you, Lisa. We miss you, I said. Her passing is still fresh to me. It will be 5 years this May since my sister Lisa died. Backyard sobriety. Back on the road! Jackson and I did not stay at the cemetery for long. I was ready to see Marissa and Christian. I was missing my mom. Straight up Interstate 35, and soon we were back in Fort Worth. Christian was in good spirits, having had Mommy and Grandma all to himself all week. Grandma had spoiled him. They'd had a trip to the zoo, a trip to the library. She bought him a new Dallas Cowboy hoodie, and he never took it off. They had eaten out. Grandma and grandson had a special time together while they gave Mommy space to do her work. 20 years sober. Another milestone passed in COVID was my 20-year anniversary of being sober, which I celebrated on February 28, 2021. We never get to hear the eulogies at our own funeral, but in 12-step life, our sobriety birthday, it's a close version of that. This year, turning 20, I heard kind words. In 12-step tradition, we celebrate our sobriety birthday more than our actual real birthday. It's a big deal. Addiction leads to jail, institutions, insanity, and death. But a power greater than ourselves gifts us a second chance. In recovery, we were gifted with a second chance. Our old life, destroyed by alcohol, had to die before we could be reborn. Unless the grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. John 12:24. I've heard that quote my whole life and never really understood it until sobriety. My drinking life died 20 years ago, and from its ashes, my new sober life arises, bearing much fruit. Lisa's gift. It was my sister Lisa, now resting in Oakwood Cemetery, who led me to sobriety. She gently intervened in my life back in late 2000. Dylan, do you think you might have a problem with drinking? Her guidance gave me sobriety on February 28, 20 years ago. Her gift to me gave my wife and my sons a sober husband and father. One solace I take from Lisa's life is living sober. That is how I pay her life forward. It doesn't give my mom and dad their daughter back, but it tells me her life counted. Thank you, Fort Worth. My sobriety journey began in Fort Worth, going with Lisa to open 12-step meetings. One of the old-timers from those first days with Lisa, a gentle spiritual giant named Mark, called me in March of 2020, just at the outset of COVID. Hey, Dylan, I don't know if you're interested, but due to COVID, we're going online with Zoom. If you'd like to join, 7 a.m. meeting is going to be happening on Zoom 7 days a week. Mark had told me back then while he gave me the dial-in number. And join I did. For all of COVID, for over a year now, I've gotten up at 4:45 a.m. in Los Angeles to log on to Zoom at 5 a.m. with these sober friends in Fort Worth. They have saved my life. More better. Before COVID, I went to 2 in-person 12-step meetings a week, Tuesday and Thursday evenings here in Culver City. Since COVID, I now go to over 7 meetings a week. I start each day at 5 a.m. with prayer and meditation and laughter and learning, logged on to Fort Worth. My 12-step Zoom quilt is how I hear God. Good, orderly direction from a group of drunks. Fort Worth started my sobriety in 2001, and Fort Worth kept me going during COVID 20 years later. Another modern miracle. Backyard sobriety. Now, the Saturday evening before Easter, driving up I-35 with my son, having visited my dead sister Lisa's grave, I was heading to see some of those same sobriety friends, Mark and others, at a small backyard meeting. Back at Mom's house, I showered and shaved and washed away the country. It was date night, sober style, as Marissa and I left Jackson and Christian with my mom and dad and took the minivan to a backyard 12-step meeting. Invited into a garden. Our hostess Jan is a woman I've seen every morning on Zoom for over a year, but never met in person. When she heard I was coming to Texas, she invited me to her backyard 12-step meeting. She hosts a small, socially distant circle of chairs meeting in her backyard. Another gift of living sober is being invited into people's gardens and being a respectful visitor, not the tornado I was before. God under the post oaks. The setting was peaceful, outdoor holy. Marissa and I walked around the side of the home to the backyard. The puppies are barking. There, with magnificent post oaks standing sentinel, was the circle. Marissa and I took the last 2 chairs. I held her hand the entire hour on this Saturday night before Easter. Many of the faces I knew from the 5 a.m. Zoom. I was seeing some in person for the first time, like Jan and Sherry, people I've only seen on Zoom. Some I have known my entire 20 years, like Mark, people who were there in 2001 and who are still there now. 4, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them. Matthew 18:20. Easter Sunday, second Easter of COVID. Here we were in my parents' home on the second Sunday of Easter. Remember last year when there had been hope that maybe we'd be past COVID by Easter of 2020? Well, it is 2021. We're still not past it, but we're making progress. Looking down, looking up. There is a critique of modern life that we have lost our ability to be awed, that we take it all for granted. Father Richard Rohr suggests our access to awe, to be able to look up in wonder, is to remember how to look down, to purposefully peer into our own brokenness. He talks about the spirituality of the second half of life. He guides people to do shadow work through the Enneagram and 12-step work. His lessons came to me around these campfires under the stars. Circles of gratitude. Looking down and dreaming a campfire, then looking up into the heavens to see Orion and the Big Dipper and the rising moon. In 12-step meetings, looking down into my human brokenness, and then coming back to family and friends and looking up to see with new eyes the blessings that a sober life yields. When the bounty is seen newly, the unmerited, undeserved grace of life in its awe-full majesty, there is nothing to do but say thank you and to pay it forward. Zoom church and Easter resurrection. Sunday morning we gathered in the living room and attended Mom's online church service, beamed from First Presbyterian in Fort Worth. The organ music was bold and bright, with trumpets and flares, the triumphant Protestant proclamation of arrival. The sermon was a careful reflection on the difference between resuscitation and resurrection, with awe at the possibility of resurrection. Jesus came back. What did I miss? His followers did not recognize him. He had to walk with them and talk with them and dine with them and remind them. We get it and we lose it. Father Rohr suggests the Bible is a text in travail. Just like life, we take 3 steps forward and 2 steps backward. We find the path and we lose the path. In 12-step living, we say progress, not perfection. We don't strive for perfection. We don't get it all handled. We let our old, selfish life die away. We pray for guidance to live newly. We listen for direction. And we are gifted with lives beyond our wildest dreams. Lives that look nothing like what we would have wished for back in our addiction. Like road trips to family and friends and faith. Don't let a good pandemic go to waste. There's more. We had more moments. Christian also had a best ever fishing day. We drove all the way back to Los Angeles, taking the northern route. We saw Cadillac Ranch in Amarillo and Albuquerque. We saw the snow-covered peaks in New Mexico across the high desert. We got a speeding ticket. I took home poison ivy that took over 3 weeks to heal. I hadn't had poison ivy in over 35 years. We drove through Winslow, Arizona, and spent 2 nights in magical Sedona. We saw friends in Phoenix. Our friend Nancy generously baked a German chocolate cake and surprised me with it on my 52nd birthday. More miracle moments. But that's enough for now. What we focus on matters. I don't want to suggest rose-colored glasses nor minimize the suffering COVID has caused. But the same number of people died this past year from tuberculosis that died from COVID. I've heard an awful lot about COVID. I've heard almost nothing about tuberculosis. What we focus on is important. Life always kicks us. COVID is only one way to die, of an infinite number of ways to die. COVID tried to kill us this year. Alcoholism will try to kill me for the rest of my life. Life is always trying to kill us. Big shocks from nature. Mother Nature when she's mad, like wildfires and droughts, earthquakes and freezes. And little shocks like addiction and despair and hopelessness. We humans, we naked apes, we group together to get through it all. We have family and friends, fellowship and faith to survive. Everyone is going to die. It's no big victory to die. It is an automatic outcome that awaits each of us. The victory arises from choosing how to live. I can be respectful of the suffering COVID caused, and I can say thank you to the good things that happened this year too. It's hard to be hateful when I'm grateful. I choose to be grateful. Don't let a good pandemic go to waste. That's been one of my mantras during COVID, along with don't be the same person coming out of COVID who went into COVID. I am not throwing away my shot. The soundtrack to Hamilton has been the soundtrack of COVID for me. I play Hamilton when I exercise. I play Hamilton when I take the dogs for a walk. I play Hamilton in the shower. Hey, yo, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. What am I going to do with the second half of my life? I'm going to invest in this American experiment. I am doubling down on love and tolerance, on friends and family, and what we have in common. We all have gray brains and red hearts. We are much more alike than different. Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. That's the quote we get from Churchill. Our democracy got us through 2020. Thank you, democracy. And thank you all for reading and listening. Art is where living happens for each of us. Thank you for helping me practice my art. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? You do for you, I do for me. We each do. Thanks for listening.